Our focus question for today's lesson is, how do I write a conclusion for my story that helps my reader understand why I wrote it? In this lesson, you will learn how to write a conclusion for your narrative by making sure you have made your purpose for writing clear to the reader. Well, let's review what we've done so far. By now, we should have selected a seed idea from previously written entries, began writing a first draft by copying from our writer's notebook to a loose leaf sheet of paper, written a beginning to our narrative that is either action, dialogue, or thinking, and then selected our most important moment and added details to draw attention to it. On day one, that looked like drafting, right? Selecting a seed idea and then drafting, and then here's my example of drafting from that day. On day two, we worked on our leads. How are we going to start our stories, right? Action, dialogue, thinking, and here's my example of that. And then on day three, we added details into our story by focusing on the most important moment and including things about our senses. Here's my example of that. Well, we will achieve today's objective in 3 steps. First, we will identify the so what of our narratives. Then we will notice how our mentor texts have concluded. What did the authors do and how can we imitate that process? And then third, we will craft a conclusion that not only brings our narrative to an end, but also helps our readers to understand why they read it. So remember that by now you should be at a point where you can think about the end of your narrative, which definitely requires you to write above and beyond the time with these videos. So to identify the so what of your narrative, you will need to look over your draft and ask yourself, what is the point of my story? Right? So why did you choose this one moment out of like 4,000 you could have chosen from? Or in still other words, what do you want your readers to take away from having read your narrative? So my so what might be something like this. I need to pay more attention to what is going on around me. This story is shaping up to be one that has meaning for me, and that so what applies to others too, which is the goal of any good story, right? We want to learn from what we read. Well, to make sure that I'm choosing the right type of story and that it does, in fact, have a so what moment in it, I want to look back at some of the mentor texts that we've read. Remember, we weren't just reading for fun, although that is definitely one reason to read, but we were reading those texts together so that we could learn from published authors about how it's done. So, in Mr. Entwistle, we read this. He tore the same note in half, crumpled it up, and threw it at the wastebasket. Even though he missed it, and the wad of paper landed on the floor, even though I'd won in some way, and he'd had to back down, he looked taller. Taking my seat, I felt a bit taller myself. I shoved my hands out of sight when I saw that they were trembling. Sunlight flooded the room. "Way to go, Kate!" Sandra cheered in a too loud whisper. I scowled at her. "Shh," I said. I can see that Jean Little, the author, didn't come right out and say, "Hey, reader, the point of all this was blah, blah, blah," whatever it was, right? So no, so what was the point is really what we have to ask ourselves, and we need to do the detective work to figure it out. So I know from having read the story a few times that the likely so what from it is that in the end, what's right will be rewarded. Well, let's look at another one of our mentor texts, Come On Rain, and see what the so what might be there. "We sure did get a good soaking, Mama," I say, and we headed home, purely soothed, fresh as dew, turning toward the first sweet rays of the sun. So what? Well, I know that this story was really about mother-daughter friendships and their importance. Notice again that the author, Karen Hess, doesn't have flashing neon lights giving the theme away to us. We have to read and reread and sometimes read it again in order to find the so what and to know what that is what it is the author wants us to have learned. The third step for us today is to craft a conclusion that not only brings our narrative to an end, but also helps our readers to understand why he or she read it. Well, I've taken the advice from this lesson and tried to incorporate my so what into my draft. Remember that my so what is that I need to pay more attention to what's going on around me. So here's my draft. He swam like he had rescued wimpy foreigners all the time. He darted through the water, tugging the tube behind him, essentially swimming with one arm. I wasn't sure, but I'm certain he should have been an Olympian. In what seemed like seconds, he and the tube arrived at the rock. "You! Here!" Breathless, he motioned his commands in case I didn't understand. I did as told. I didn't want to be stuck on that rock forever. Then, as if swimming one way with one arm through a raging river wasn't impressive enough, this man jumped back in the water with his arm around the tube I was now sitting in and swam us both back to shore. I realized then that I should pay more attention to what's going on around me. Well, I see my so what. I didn't come right out and say it, but it is clearly there in the draft. It is something that can apply to most people, which is what we is good, right? It's all good things, these things that we're doing. So we've achieved today's objective in 3 steps. We identified the so what of our narratives. We noticed how our mentor texts have concluded, like what the authors did and how we could imitate that process. And we crafted a conclusion that not only brings our narrative to an end, but it also helps the reader to understand why he or she read it. In this lesson, we have learned how to write a conclusion for our narratives by making sure you have made your purpose for writing clear to the reader.